Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast, where we discuss natural solutions to today's worst health problems. I'm Dr. Kevin Lenderman from South Louisiana, and I'm joined by Dr. Rob DeMartino from Las Vegas, Nevada. Doc, what's up today?
Doing great, man. How about you?
Is it getting hot over there in Vegas?
We almost hit 100 degrees the other day. It's pretty wild. I mean, it's kind of early for that. Everyone's complaining, but I like it. I like my son.
Well, listen, I'm supposed to fly and see you in a few weeks, and if this airport situation doesn't clear up, we may be watching you online.
I guess we're back on Zoom.
Back on Zoom for sure. Well, so if you guys saw last week's show, we talked about vitamin D, and that's part of a larger overall concept that Dr. Rob has created for us called leverage points or levers. And so over the next several shows, we're going to be going through each one of these 5 leverage points. And before we get into it, I guess the best way to describe this is whenever you're trying to restore a patient's health, you really want to start with the big things. And everyone's so worried about all of the little details. Should I go carnivore? Should I go keto? Should I, you're missing the bigger things. And I heard Dr. Rob describe it one time, kind of like building a house. If you've got the foundation and the electrical and the plumbing, but you're worried about the paint color, right? So let's get the foundation strong, and then we can worry about the small things. Doc, talk about these levers. How many of them and how you came up with this concept?
Yeah, so we call them Archimedes levers. If you know the story of Archimedes said, if you give me a lever, I can move the world, right? So like you said, they are major points where people get stuck. And for me, when people tell me I've tried everything, they're ready to give up, I've tried everything, my doctor's checked everything, I'll typically ask them about these 5 levers, and they're like, well, I don't know what those are. And I'm like, yeah, that's why you're not better. Because like you said, everyone's really excited about what style is the house going to be, what color is the paint going to be. Nobody gets really excited about the foundational work, but that's what really matters, especially long term. And these are big leverage points that don't get talked about a lot. And the main reason, of course, they don't get talked about a lot is there's no medications for them, right? There's no medications for them. And there's even no vitamins for them in most of the cases. Now, there will be for vitamin D, but we spent a lot of time last week talking about why that is nowhere near the same as earning it.
Right.
But these things, think of them like managers. If your manager is good, your employees will typically survive and do much better, right? You could have the greatest, nicest, most hardworking employees in the world, and if their manager is terrible, it's not going to really matter, right? So you can kill yourself on the small stuff, and I think that's where health gets overwhelming, is people will over-stress themselves about all these small details, and it's not that, diet's not important, all those things, but these guys sit at the top of the pyramid, like you said, foundational, and when people really get this dialed in, it does a large percentage of the work for them.
Yeah, and I've been studying this with you now for over a decade. I mean, I think 12, 13 years we're going on studying this, and it really is cool whenever you see how you can get to some of these core concepts that, no one ever looks at. And so let me see if I can get them, Doc. So the 5 levers are vitamin D, leptin, MSH, melatonin, and UV rays.
That's correct. Yeah, those are the 5. Yeah. All right. It only took 12 years. That's not that bad.
It only took me 12 years to figure that out, for sure. So we did vitamin D last week. We're going to talk about leptin this week. And the thing that always surprises me about leptin, this is such an important hormone, and almost no one's ever heard of it. And if they have, it's usually in regards to weight loss, right?
Yeah, most of the research around it, and it does play a major role in that. For those people out there that feel like, I kill myself, I watch everything I eat, I could work out like a mad dog, but no matter what I do, I just can't seem to take this weight off, or at least take it off at a rate that would be commensurate to what I was doing. Those people have leptin resistance. So leptin has a tremendous amount to do with the obesity epidemic that we have going on. It's centrally involved in all these GLP-1 drugs, right? It's centrally involved, and it's probably the reason you've never heard of leptin is because they've suppressed all that information because they were preparing to do all the GLP-1s. You look up the Amgen trials to see if I'm lying to you, but I'm not. Okay. And at the same time, leptin and vitamin D are intricately linked to each other because they will go completely opposite of each other, which is why we kind of chose to do it in this order because there's such a relationship. So while leptin has all of this to do with weight gain and the ability to lose weight and metabolism, it really is a major cog in keeping the energy of your body regulated. And that's the part that we don't talk about enough. But doctors say, well, it's just weight gain, right? Yeah, but it's the weight gain as a symptom of the energy in the system not being correct, which leads and drives most chronic diseases.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And you're talking about a relatively new
sure.
hormone too, right? Relatively new hormone.
Yeah.
Right? 1998, we're talking about discovery here, which in science
I
is
saw
really,
that in your show notes.
Yeah.
I'm like, 1998? I was practicing in 1998.
I know. So it seems like a while ago now, especially when you've been in practice as long as we have. But at the same time, in science, that's relatively new. But yeah, it's a relatively new hormone onto the scene. But I mean, it just makes tremendous headway for people.
Yeah, that's very new because when you think about it, insulin was discovered in 2000. I mean, 1900 something, right? Like 1905.
Yeah, beginning
or
of 1900s.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
really
like
early.
The very early 1900s.
Yeah, really early 1900s,
Golly.
Banting and Best discovered insulin, and that kind of set the tone. And then leptin, when you figure out, comes almost 100 years later, and that's the hormone that governs insulin. And we'll get into all of that, but leptin governs insulin. So I mean, we're again talk about trying to maintain everyone's talking about insulin sensitivity right now and insulin resistance, which is an important topic, but leptin governs that. All right, so talk about working downstream. You want to work upstream, right? Fix the manager, and then you'll find out how good your employees are, and they're usually pretty darn good.
Yeah. The way I explain this to patients, and I know you do as well, but so leptin is kind of like the boss, insulin is the next person down, and then glucose and A1C are like the lowest employees. So for all of these people so worried about their blood sugar is like going to a restaurant and complaining to the busboy. Like, he's the lowest guy there. He's not going to be able to fix your problem. You want to complain to the manager. You want to get to the controlling decision maker, and that's very much what leptin is, right?
Yeah, and it's not that the busboy is bad, but he's not going to be able to make decisions, right? You want to get to the big decision makers, and that's why they're leverage points, because they're going to govern all this. And then again, if you fix that, so many things domino into place, right? And part of the thing with the 5 levers is they're all intricately connected to each other, right? So if your vitamin D is low, you're going to have a problem with leptin, right? So part of the reason that we asked how we kind of came up with them is they all play intricate roles with one another. So you can't really fix one in a vacuum and then not worry about the other ones. They all have to work together again. But when they do, and they're very much like leptin is a circadian hormone. Right, it is based on light and dark cycles, which again, that people don't really talk about that, but vitamin D is based off of light and dark cycles as well. Melatonin very much based off of light and dark cycles. Yeah. So the ideology of leptin being around into these ideas of being able to tell your body what's happening. Basically, think of it as like a really important middleman. He's the one. Leptin is going to tell your brain what's happening with the energetic needs of your body. Do you have enough energy? Great. You get a signal of satiety. You feel full. And people think it has nothing to do with how much food you stuffed in your belly. It has all to do is, hey, we've made enough energy from what we've brought in. So then leptin signals to the brain and says, hey man, we're good. We have plenty of energy. You don't have to bring any more energy in. So they call it satiety because then their hunger goes away. But then all of a sudden now, if they're not getting that signal, well, they just keep eating, they get sugar cravings. That's the most obvious sign. If somebody's BMI is over 20, you probably have issues with leptin, right? You're pretty much going to have issues with leptin. You got sugar cravings, things like that. You're going to have issues with leptin because now your body's looking for hot, fast energy because it has no idea how much money is in the account. You're handing somebody your debit card and you're like, I don't know if there's $1 million in here or if this 50-cent pack of gum is going to bounce. That's what happens when leptin isn't signaling well.
Fascinating. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So talk a little bit about what happens. How do we create leptin resistance, and how do we know about it? And what's the story with figuring this leptin secret out?
Yes. Okay. So that's a good one. So start with the basics of how it works, right? So leptin is typically secreted from your fat cells, right? So adipose tissue will secrete leptin. So when you eat calories, right? You eat food, they're broken down into energetic units that we'll call calories, right? A portion of those calories are going to get stored in your liver, and then a portion of those calories are going to get stored in your adipose tissue, in your fat tissue. And then a lot of those calories are going to get used right away, right? You're going to burn them for energy right now. So think of it like you get your paycheck. You're like, okay, I'm going to take a chunk of this money. I'm going to pay my bills right now. I'm going to keep a chunk of this money. I'm going to put aside for the 15th of the month bills when that day comes around. And I'm going to put this aside for retirement. And when all three of those pools are filled, leptin then signals up to your brain saying, hey, we're good here. Right, we've made everything we need to make. All this stuff works. Everything is great. Now, your body mainly does this signaling at night after it's dark, after melatonin has worked. Then leptin will signal to your brain. So that happens most accurately around midnight to 2 a.m. So that's the window for leptin sensitivity. So again, how does this get screwed up? When you see all of this research talking about people, we're in Vegas, you got a lot of shift workers, right? People who are working overnight shifts, 24-hour town especially. If you're missing that window, or you're going to sleep too late at night, or you're seeing light too late at night, and you're missing that window, your leptin will not get sensitive. And that's where you see this big claim that you see like kind of popping around. I've noticed it more now ever, maybe it's because I'm looking. It says, blue light makes you fat. Well, how does blue light make you fat? Well, blue light at night stops you from signaling leptin, and it won't tell your brain that you're full. But if you get leptin resistant to now where your brain can't hear that signal, right? Your leptin is signaling out. What ends up happening is you don't burn those calories right now. You still store it in your liver, but instead of paying your first of the month bills, your body's going, I have no idea where we are energetically. I have no idea how much energy is in the system, so I'm going to take these extra calories and I'm going to store it in fat. Now again, everything may be able to work perfectly, but it doesn't know if it's safe to spend this money. It doesn't know where it's at financially. So it says, okay, I'm not going to spend this energy, I'm going to store it as fat. But then what happens? You get more fat, which means more leptin signaling. So now you keep pounding out leptin, and the more leptin you signal out, the more inflammation you signal out. So if leptin starts getting high, the inflammation levels start coming up with it, you jam up a part of your brain called the hypothalamus, and now all of a sudden, your body and your brain are completely disconnected from one another. And this leads to these crazy cascades of things that can go wrong. But when people are leptin sensitive, they don't have any of that, right? They eat, they burn their fuel, they store what they need for long term, and then if they've got any excess calories, they burn it off as heat. It's like having extra money left over after you did all this stuff. You want to go give it to the casinos, and you do give it to them, right? You don't leave with it. You give it to them. It's a donation, right? You want to go blow it at the casino, knock yourself out, do that. But that's how the body looks at it. But it has to know where it's at energetically in order to make those decisions. And leptin resistance is a major reason why people will gain weight, because they'll just never get that signal at the hypothalamus.
So that's why I've heard you before call leptin almost like the energy accountant.
Yep.
Of your body.
Yep.
And if it can't figure out where it's at, you're going to gain weight, you're going to get more resistance, and now you're on this slippery slope, right?
Yeah. It's got to be able to signal back and forth, right? So it is remember the definition of a hormone, right? A hormone is made in one part of your body but does its work somewhere else. That's what a hormone is, right? So where it's made is not where it does its work. It goes and does it someplace else. So leptin has to be able to be made in your fat as a signaling molecule that then get to your brain and saying, here's where we are. And when it can tell the brain here's where we are, and there's plenty of energy to go around, or there's not, your brain can then make accurate decisions of what to do. But that's why it's not making accurate decisions, because people are like, I'm starving myself, I'm working out really hard, I'm doing all these different types of things, but nothing's happening. Because your brain can't make a good decision saying, I know you're trying to do this, but I don't know if it's a safe decision, so I'm going to err on the side of caution, and I'm going to save this energy and hope that we have enough. Because if we're wrong, we're dead.
And we hear this all the time. A woman will come in and say, my husband, we did exactly the same thing. My husband lost 15 pounds, and I lost 1.5 pounds. And I'm like killing myself. Yep. It's leptin resistance a lot of times causing it.
Yeah, it's leptin resistance. And that's where, they say it's hormonal. And it's correct, but everyone hears hormones and they think estrogens and progesterones and testosterones, and that stuff is all downstream. But the hormonal change that we're actually talking about is this leptin, melatonin, and again, vitamin D we talked about last week is a hormone. in technicality. They named it vitamin D, but it's actually a prohormone. So that's what they mean when they say it's a hormonal problem. But again, nobody measures leptin levels on lab work, right? That you can. Right. Nobody does. And nobody looks to see if, we do. Obviously, we look to see if it's sensitive, and we do a bunch of tests around this, because if it's not sensitive, you talk about, look, it's going to be a major cog in diabetes. It's a major problem in neurological disorders, right? Because if you can't get insulin sensitivity in the brain, someone's going to end up with some sort of neurodegenerative type of disorder, right? Obesity is an epidemic of our time. It is a major problem you'll find in autoimmune disease. Is it an upscale hormone that is involved with your thyroid? You know, people talk about like the HPA axis, your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your adrenal axis. 20 years ago, nobody ever said this to me in clinic. Right, but now patients are like, I think I have a problem with my HPA axis. I'm like, wow, that's great. I'm so glad that you guys know what that is. It makes my job easier than having to explain it, right? But that hypothalamus is where leptin signals. But the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the thyroid is also the pathway. So everyone talks about HPA, but HPT is a very real thing as well too. So if leptin is off, your thyroid will be dysfunctional as well, which again, you get to the most common diagnosed problem today is thyroid disorders, right? And to personal favorites.
And that's why leptin's one of the levers, right? And not thyroid, because the leptin controls
If you're trying to fix your thyroid and your leptin levels are off, not going to work. Just not going to work. Yeah. And then to get around to it, it's just going to be universal how many problems are going to be involved.
Yeah. So paint a picture of us for 2026, typical American lifestyle, and what all different parts of your typical day screw up our leptin levels.
Yeah, so the major parts, like I said, it comes down to it. So vitamin D and leptin are 100% linked to each other. So if vitamin D goes up 25%, leptin goes down 25%. If vitamin D goes down 25%, leptin goes up 25%. So what that means is the amount of vitamin D that you're getting, and again, if you're getting UV light in the middle of the day, the same type of sunlight that's going to tan you is going to build up your vitamin D levels. The ability to keep leptin under control it is intimately connected, right? Those two things have to be together. So you can't have real normal leptin levels if your vitamin D is low. Now, here's the crazy thing about it. We kind of talked about not taking vitamin D as a supplement. If your leptin is high and you take vitamin D and you try to raise that as a supplement, you'll actually end up storing that vitamin D in your fat, which makes you fatter. And it makes your cholesterol go sky high. Okay? So we want to make sure we get adequate sunlight during the day. The flip side of that is if we get too much light at night, one of the first things that'll happen is when we get into a state of darkness, it'll take about 3 or 4 hours, but then the melatonin cycle will start, and then leptin can bind. So leptin can only bind after there's been a sufficient amount of darkness, because again, your body is not sure it can work on the engines unless they're shut. So it'll wait for a certain amount of darkness before it's sure it can shut your engines down, before it can say, okay, let's take stock of where we are, right? And then leptin is going to signal. So if we're getting that light into the nighttime and we miss that 12 to 2 a.m., that midnight to 2 a.m. window, now leptin is not going to get as sensitive as it should. And if we miss that, there's a whole cascade of things that'll go wrong. The first thing that happens after leptin binds is your immune system repairs itself, right? Then your pancreas gets signals to bring your insulin levels down and to make your body more sensitive to insulin. That's why I say leptin governs insulin, because leptin has to work first before your body creates insulin sensitivity. Then it's going to go to your thyroid. It's going to optimize all your thyroid hormones and its sensitivity to those hormones. Then it's going to go to your pituitary gland. It's going to stimulate hormones that help you repair, like growth hormone, right? Everyone talks about growth hormone, right? Bodybuilders talk about growth hormone all the time, but growth hormone is a normal thing to make you heal. And you're going to get production of MSH, which is another lever, which we'll talk about in another portion. So I said, this is an early domino in the cascade of how your body heals. If it never falls, it's never going to go anywhere. And to that point, and I know I'm going on here, but to that point,
no, it's good.
I think one of the most critical things that we need to understand about leptin is if we have leptin resistance, no matter what any testing says, you will always have an excess amount of cortisol in your system, which is your stress hormone, and your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system will always be on overdrive. So leptin resistance itself will cause nervous system changes of fight or flight. That gets back to your favorite POTS, right? Your favorite condition. I know you're loaded with POTS patients right now, right? So POTS is a huge thing with leptin. How do you get POTS patients better? How are you so able to do it where everybody else talks about it, right? Because we know that that's a lever for them. Right? So no matter what somebody says, they say, oh, my adrenals, my cortisol. And I'm like, what's your leptin? They're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you're too far downstream. We can't fix that unless we look upstream.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't even know what the percentage is of our patients that come in with chronic conditions that have leptin resistance. I know it's way over 90. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is literally almost everyone we see has some degree of leptin resistance. In fact, when we see a patient that we check and they don't have it, we're elbowing everybody like, hey, come look, man, we got one that doesn't have leptin resistance.
Yeah, it's like, wow, it's one less thing we have to do for these nice people, right? So it is funny.
Very rare.
It's rare because, like I said, but that's why it's a lever, right? You find these problems in so many of these different cases that really kind of no matter what chronic problem somebody has, it's pretty much going to be there. And that's why it's frustrating that they don't look for it. Again, the amount of inflammation that goes along with this, all of these things are big, bad issues that, these inflammatory markers that you'll find elevated in all of the who's who of diseases, they all roll with leptin. And interestingly enough, too, we did the episode on mold, right? And talk about how mold is a big epidemic, too. Even in Vegas where it's hot, still they say 50% of the houses have mold damage. Leptin is an incredibly important marker for mold and biotoxic illness because mold is one of the few infectious-y type of things that can get into your system, stimulate, act like a biotoxin, and it will drive your leptin levels up, which will drive all your inflammatory markers up too. But if you're not doing things to get your leptin under control and you're a mold patient, you are going to have a real hard time getting your inflammation levels under control, and you will stay in that cascade of illness for a very, very long period of time. So there are infectious-y things that can set the stage, too, for having leptin to be a problem. And then the other big one is eating late at night.
Yeah.
Eating late at night's a killer.
That's what I was going to ask you next, is about diet, because so not enough sun, too much blue light, and then talk about how diet messes this up.
So we talked about the ideology that leptin has to bind, and then leptin will then signal to your pancreas to say, okay, lower the insulin levels and make it sensitive to it. And it cannot do that if there is still food and sugar that needs to be processed. So if we eat too late at night and that job is not done, your leptin will send a signal and your pancreas will be like, I hear you, but I can't go home yet. I'm not done with work because I still got to handle and process all this sugar. So it's not even a process of its signaling, is it'll just hold up and then eventually it sits in stores. And then again, you gain weight, you store fat. You store fat everywhere, right? You store fat in your adipose tissue, you get fat, you get visceral fat in your organs. The ideology of fatty liver, do you find fatty liver without leptin? No, right? So if you got diagnosed with fatty liver disease, whether it's for, non-alcoholic or, whichever ones that they come up on the commercials now, that's leptin. Leptin is causing fat to get stored because your body is storing it because it doesn't know that it can burn it. So all these problems that you hear, I've named quite a bunch through the course of today, you see they all come back to these formal ideas of leptin. But even something as innocuous and simple enough as, I want a little sweet snack before I go to bed is devastating to your leptin levels. And even natural sugar. You say, well, I have a piece of fruit, that's healthy. That's still sugar that's got to process, and leptin can't bind, insulin can't sensitize, your immune system won't be able to heal, and you will gain weight.
Wow. Such an important hormone. It's such an important thing. And so, speaking of fatty liver, we were in New Orleans at a show last weekend. We went and saw Robert Plant.
Oh, nice.
And so I had to watch commercials. I don't ever watch commercials at my house. And the amount of drug commercials that come on your standard television, because I wasn't able to fast forward, I wasn't on YouTube or anything, and they have this new one now where I thought I had fatty liver, but now I have MASH.
MASH, yeah.
Have you seen
this?
this?
Yeah, MASH is the other one now, yeah.
Yeah, and I had to turn I'm like, it's like, how much other things can we come up with to call it, man? I mean, come
I'm sure
on.
my wife gets annoyed because, like, I'll walk by, I'm like, or you have leptin resistance, you know, and then I like walk into the other room, and I always have some sort of fun comment to make about something. I can't even watch medical shows. Like she knows a long time ago, like we had to stop watching all those because I'm like, oh my god, like, are you serious? It's all these things, but you know, and it's funny too because I don't know again if it's just attention. I still see so many drug commercials for osteoporosis. Like drug commercial for drug commercial after osteoporosis. So leptin plays a major role in bone health in osteoporosis, right? Think about it this way. What do we tell everybody as they get older, right? Do weight-bearing exercise, right? Weight-bearing exercise makes your bones stronger, which is a 100% true statement. There's a law in science, we call it Wolff's Law. Bones under stress remodel stronger, okay? Now, if you follow that thread, somebody who carries more weight, somebody who's obese, and the more obese they are, the more important this would get, they should technically have the strongest bones, right? Because they're always constantly, not to be mean, but they're always constantly under stress, so they should be getting stronger and stronger. Yet when you look it up, people with obesity have the highest levels of osteopenia and osteoporosis that we find in anybody else. So that's a paradox, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? Because that would not make sense
that doesn't
logically.
Make sense.
But what it means is leptin resistance nullifies Wolff's Law. So leptin resistance will basically not let your bones remodel and your bones will physically break down. So now again, how many systems do we have to bring in here, right? If you're carrying excess weight, obviously that puts pressure on your cardiovascular system. Your brain's going to use most of the energy. It's going to get put on that system. Obviously, when you get metabolic syndrome and diabetes, that's going to involve a lot of different systems. Right now, we're talking about bones. We talked about liver. We talked about POTS. We talked about all your nervous system stuff of staying in fight or flight, right? You give me a lever and I can move the world. And if you get your leptin sensitive and you learn how to do that, first you got to learn what the hormone is and just how important it is. But here's the problem now, and this is where it gets scary. These GLP-1s are targeting this, right? They are trying to backdoor this system. And everyone always asks me what I think about that. I mean, it's even in the same conversation sometimes around peptides. And I'll say the same thing across the board. You will have a problem long term. You know, one of my most trusted mentors had said somebody who takes GLP-1s might lose 10 to 15 years of their life at the end because it's going to be that big of a problem. Because this is what I can tell you for sure as I sit here. When two things happen in the body at the same time, that are naturally never ever meant to happen together, it will create a problem long term. So even if you lose weight now, if your body is saying we're forcing it to be leptin sensitive, but you're doing all of the things that make you leptin resistant, we can force this for a while, but eventually when these two things coexist, that shouldn't coexist together, eventually your body will damage from that. It will create confusion, and anything that creates confusion creates inflammation. And that's the same story around anything that we try to do from the outside in, especially chemically.
Wow, that is so fascinating. Well, listen, I hope you guys got a lot out of this. And so we test leptin. We test leptin resistance. We test vitamin D. We test MSH. We test melatonin. Like, we look at all of these levers to see if we've got these levers, these larger leverage points right, so that we can get the foundation and the plumbing and the electrical on the house right. We can worry about the paint colors and the flowers later, you know, back to this foundation analogy. But if you guys are interested in this, you can give us a call, look at us on our website. If you've been struggling and you just want to find a better way out of this, then these are the levers that can do it. Doc, that was another good one, man. Next week, we were going to cover another one of these big leverage points. And it might get a little more confusing than this one, but that's okay. We'll work.
Do our best.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Hey, thanks for joining us, guys. Doc, thanks. We'll see you next week.
Have a good one.